I've talked before about how the GameCube controller is one of my favorite controller designs ever. Certainly my favorite Nintendo one. And we haven't really had new controller designs that have played off that in an interesting way. Yes, we absolutely have newer GameCube controllers coming from third-party companies, but all of those look to just emulate and copy that original design, as opposed to elevating it and changing it in some way. And there's a new controller I've been trying out that looks to do this at least a little bit with the Duelist from Retro Fighters. Full disclosure, this was sent to me in the mail by Retro Fighters. I didn't ask for it, it just showed up in my mail out of nowhere. I didn't talk to anyone about it, but I thought it looked cool and I wanted to try it out. Now, Retro Fighters has made it very clear that their main goal with this controller is really to market it as something for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It even says on the box itself on the back, designed exclusively for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And I very much get why. Part of it comes down to the way the button layout is done. This additional button right here, which we'll talk about, that has some very specific uses just for that game. But I do want to talk about this a little bit as a just general Switch controller as well, because honestly, there are some really interesting things about how this controller is designed that I like. And I would love to see another version of it that takes some of these concepts and just remixes it a little more. To begin with, let's just kind of go over the basics of what is going on with this controller. This is a $30 wireless Pro Controller option for the Switch, which is a pretty aggressive price point even by unlicensed controller standards. I mean, you can find even cheaper ones out there, but honestly, once it gets to a certain kind of low price point, you begin to get a little worried about what exactly you're buying. So $30 feels really good for this, especially considering it is a wireless design, uses a USB-C for hookup. It's got all the main button layouts with a couple additional buttons that we'll talk about in a little bit, but what really ends up standing out about this controller is kind of how it takes some design inspiration from the GameCube controller. Obviously, it's not the same actual configuration as far as its shape and all that kind of stuff, but there are a few specific design beats along with the color scheme that it takes from the GameCube, specifically the sticks and the button layout. Now for the sticks, obviously, is an offset design. The left stick head has the larger head with the kind of upraised lines that give it that little bit of extra grippiness in your thumb, while the right stick is designed to look like the C stick, where it's just a smaller little nub, and in my case, the C is just a little off alignment and I can't stop staring at it. What's the interesting takeaway here though isn't these sticks themselves, but the gate that is around them. The vast majority of controllers nowadays all have a circular gate because it allows for a very easy, smooth motion when you're moving the stick around in all different directions. However, going back to, again, its GameCube inspiration, the Duelist instead relies on an octagonal gate. What this ends up doing is, yes, it makes it a little rockier and weirder if you're doing any kind of moving inputs where you're circling the stick around, as you can even hear, but what it ends up giving you in return is a very precise way of knowing which direction you're really pushing. If you're playing something where it's important to really have that precise inputs of entering exactly left, right, up, down, or one of the four main diagonals, this is going to make sure you do it. Because even if you end up being a little off in the first place when you first start pushing the stick in a direction, it's going to make sure that you end up kind of guiding yourself to one of these 8 little corner points. Again, this controller is being targeted primarily at Smash Ultimate, and so that is where this ends up really making a lot of sense, because Smash doesn't really have you doing a lot of rolling inputs. I mean, there are a couple specific characters that have it as a kind of gimmick to harken back to other fighting games, but as far as the vast majority of the cast goes, it's really a lot more important to make sure that you have a very clear input between forward, up, down, left, all that good stuff. And honestly, it's just really nostalgic for how the GameCube controller feels. Now, as for the ABXY layout, or in this case, ABXYS, it does take inspiration from the GameCube controller, but takes it in a different direction. Now, the approach to designing the ABXY is honestly one of the reasons why I really love the GameCube controller. Most controllers nowadays have a very sort of simplified ABXY layout where it's in a diamond pattern and all the buttons are roughly the same size, and it's a very much one-size-fits-all approach, right? I mean, no matter what kind of game you're playing, generally, as long as it's using those face buttons, you're gonna have comfortable access to all 4 of them. The GameCube, on the other hand, instead of giving sort of equal face value to each of the buttons, made the A button the center star with the X and Y curved around it and a little B button off to the corner. This ends up making it so that if a game is designed with it in mind, A is really meant to be the main button you're going to be using more often, and you can easily have access to those other buttons when you want to, rolling from one to the other. Honestly, it's freaking genius and I love it. And yes, it doesn't work for every single game out there, but again, for those that kind of have a main face button that is used more often than others, usually the A button, it is a really cool design. And the Duelist takes inspiration from that. Now, obviously, it's not doing the same kind of design. It does not have a central A button with other buttons curved around it. It's sticking with more traditional button shapes and outlines for the most part, but the A is still a much larger button than the others, and the layout of them is not quite exactly the same. I mean, obviously, with the addition of this little S button, that messes with things a lot, and you end up with something that's kind of a trapezoid shape instead of a diamond, and does put a little more difference between some of the extremes, in particular going from the A to Y button. To be honest, this felt very strange to use initially. Going from a traditional 4-button setup to this kind of 5 feeling, it takes you a little bit of time just to get used to how that feels different. Now, this is really one of the main parts of the controller where the discussion about being designed specifically for Smash Brothers, I think is an important one to have, because there's a part of this design that I think is not great for using in other games, but for Smash specifically is awesome, and that has to do with the distancing on the A and Y. Reaching Y just feels a little more annoying than the others because of how pronounced the A is. You're gonna want to rest your thumb there. And in Smash, the Y button doesn't really matter. I mean, it kind of does, it's the jump button, but so is X. They do the same thing. So as long as you have access to one of them, you're fine. Thus, having the X button right here, great, fine, you're good. You don't really need the Y button. It's still there for if you're using this with other titles, but that is why the Y button is so far away. I didn't mean to do that pun, but we're gonna leave it in. Now, I'm sure the big question a lot of people have though is, what's going on with this button right here? What is the S button? It actually has 3 different purposes, all of which are meant specifically for Smash Ultimate. It can work as either a smash attack, a short hop attack, or just a straight up short hop. It doesn't do all 3 of these at the same time. You swap between them by using this other little extra button right here that's got a little punching symbol on it. Hitting that will swap between the 3 modes. By default, it starts off in the smash button mode. As a smash button, hitting it, you'll perform a forward smash attack in whatever direction you're facing. Handy if you don't like using the C stick or using directionals at the same time. It just brings it down to a single button option. Nice, but not, I think, the big selling one out of the 3. Second function, short hop attack. This is something that you can do yourself normally by just pressing the attack button and jump button at the same time, but singling it down to a single button option is also nice. The third possibility though, and honestly the one that I think is the most important and kind of interesting, is that it can also just be read as a short hop on its own. Short hopping is something that you can do with a button press normally, but it requires very precise, specific timing and can be really annoying to pull off if you're not playing Smash all the time and making it a technique that you are intentionally trying to cultivate and train. And so what this ends up doing is it gives you a separate dedicated button that just reads as a short hop no matter what. It doesn't matter how hard you press it, how long you hold it for, hitting the S button is going to end up doing that short hop, which is a really handy technique to have on hand if you're not great at doing those normally, but you want to do them in game. And this is really the big selling point of the controller. I mean, being based on the GameCube controller is great, and it's one of the things that really appeals to me, but ultimately the main selling point of this is the extra functionality you're getting out of that S button. Though it is worth noting that the Duelist does still support a number of other common special features in third-party controllers. It has rumble, it has motion controls, it can turn on the Switch, it does not have an NFC reader, but that's pretty standard for third-party controllers these days. The Duelist is a specialized controller meant for one specific game, and I think it does accomplish that purpose very well and is worth looking at if you're a fan of Smash Brothers. At the same time though, seeing how it just takes these certain little aspects of the GameCube controller and brings it to the modern day gets me excited more and more about companies messing with this kind of design. As I've said, I love the GameCube controller design, but it's really for a few specific aspects of it that aren't really used in modern day controllers anymore. And there are other parts of the GameCube controller that I don't love as much that have heavily been improved upon since it was released. The Duelist gets this part of the way there by incorporating that stick design and by at least doing its own spin on the ABXY layout while using a Switch Pro controller style grip, which is cool. But it just makes me think more and more about what other features could be incorporated and changed. Seeing something that is shaped like a Pro controller but has the ABXY layout like it is on the GameCube controller with the curved X and Y, and having analog triggers as opposed to the button ones. Yes, there are no current Switch games that really make full use of analog triggers. There's a couple specific cases thanks to things like Super Mario Sunshine, but even when games don't take full advantage of having analog triggers, I just like the feel of them, to be honest. And I gotta admit, part of this too for me is that I just really enjoy unique, interesting controller designs, and I feel like the industry in general is getting further and further away from that. For honestly good reasons. I mean, there's a purpose behind the fact that the Xbox Series X controller is barely any different from the Xbox One controller. There's a reason why PlayStation changed the way their controllers were shaped after having many of them kind of have the same design, with the DualSense finally embracing a more kind of rounded out style. All of them are focusing on refining and having a controller that is a good one-size-fits-all approach, but at the same time, I feel like we're really losing some of those controllers. Slightly wackier, slightly crazy designs that sure, might look like a bit of a mess at face value, but actually have a lot of merits because of their more specialized purposes. And the Duelist, I think, is a great reminder of this. Perhaps maybe a little more specialized than I would normally have in mind, seeing as how it's targeted for one specific game, but a great reminder nonetheless. Anyways, as for the Duelist itself, honestly, I think the big takeaway here is it does exactly what it's marketed to do. It is a fantastic controller for Smash. I dug the button layout, even though it took a little time to get used to, and the additional functions opened up by that S button are fantastic. But that being said, a lot of the way it's designed does take away from its uses as a more generic controller. So really, the main reason you want to be looking at this, if you're a Smash fan, if you want something to use a little different, if you want to try and mix it up a little bit, this is awesome. For other games, maybe not as much. If you're interested in grabbing this controller, I do have a link down below in the description. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, while you're down there, go ahead and like and subscribe as well. It always gives me the nice little warm, fuzzy feeling on the inside. And I'll see you guys later.